all regulated goods that need a PC for to the EU will need a PC to Northern Ireland. Again, another quick thing to highlight is that for exports, they won't be phased in. So if you've attended the sort of the webinar for imports, obviously there's a staged approach to imports from the EU to GB. That does not apply to exports. For want of a better word, it is a hard start from the 1st of January. So if you are moving any regulated plants and plant products to the EU, you will need a phytosanitary certificate from the 1st of January. And just as the images below show, is that you do need a PC. So if you currently move things that move under the plant passporting scheme, such as plants for plantings, an EU plant passport will no longer be valid for movement between the EU and GB. You will need a phytosanitary certificate. So in terms of what actually requires a phytosanitary certificate, there's a bullet pointed list there that's sort of very high level that tells you approximately what needs a PC. So all plants for planting, root and tubercle vegetables, most fruits, and I say most fruits, and I'll touch upon the ones that don't need it. There's only a small handful. Cut flowers, seeds, vegetables, wood packaging material. Now, the one I just wanted to pull out on this is to say that wood packaging material doesn't require a PC, but it does need an ISPM 15 stamp on it. So there are requirements that wood packaging material needs to meet, as well as used agricultural and machinery and planting will need a PC. Another thing to quickly highlight is that grain, so if the EU continue to implement their current third country imports regime, then grain moving to the EU will not require a phytosanitary certificate. However, everything else listed in that bullet point list will. The one thing to point to there is obviously the link that's within the slide. And that shows, if you click that link, it will take you to the EU's website where they've sort of broken down into different areas what regulated plants are, and a couple of the other implementing acts that are pertinent to imports into the EU. One thing to highlight is that what it will do is it will take you to their legislation. So when you click on the regulated plants link, it will take you to their legislation, and then you will have to go through the relevant annexes to determine what requires a PC. But it's fairly straightforward to negotiate through those annexes, and I'll highlight a couple of the annexes through the presentation that you'll want to go and have a look at. So I gave a brief mention about what 5 fruits don't require a phytosanitary certificate, and it's those listed in the bullet points there. So if you are exporting any of those goods to the EU, you will not need a phytosanitary certificate. Another thing that would be amiss of me not to mention at this point would be what goods are prohibited by the EU, i.e. what goods you cannot send to the EU. So this is roughly split into 2 different areas. So this is taking marketing requirements aside, and it's only focusing on the phytosanitary aspects. So one of the main areas is Annex 6 of 2019-2072. And that lists prohibitions that you are not allowed to send particular genera or species of plants. And I've given an example or 2 within the text, one around obviously seed and wear potatoes, which I think is sort of quite well documented. But there are things such as prohibitions on growing media and soil as a commodity. So if you are, for example, exporting compost, etc., then as it stands today, you will not be able to export those. The second element of prohibitions relates to the high-risk plants list. And please note, this is something different from the high-priority plants list that are in imports. So if you look at the piece of legislation I've referenced within the slide, which is 2018/2019, it contains a list of plants that we are not able to export unless EFSA, so that's the European Food Safety Agency, have assessed information provided by the exporting country to ensure that they've mitigated the plant health risk associated with those goods. So within that particular list, there's things like plants for planting of malus and prunus. And we will be unable to export those until EFSA have issued or reviewed any information that we provide to them. The one thing to highlight with both of these is that the ball is very much in the EU's court for some of this. So although, like you say, the negotiating teams are pushing very hard, especially around the sort of Annex 6 prohibitions, because this is encapsulated within the equivalence application. So with the marketing requirements that there are in the sort of the equivalent side, there are also asks within that document for the plant health prohibitions to be removed. However, until the EU sort of make a designation as to what they're going to do, as it stands today, those goods listed in both Annex 6 and 2018-2019 will be prohibited. So one of the other elements I think would be useful to make everybody aware of is special requirements. So just when a slide changes, there'll be a picture in the bottom right hand corner of the slide that shows you an example of what a special requirement looks like. And bear in mind, this is just one of many. So you may hear people call them special requirements. You may also hear them called additional declarations. And it's basically just a special requirement is something that an exporting country has to meet if there's a particular pest associated with a commodity, and that exporting country needs to declare how they meet the imports of the EU's imports requirements. And you can see sort of within that image on the right hand side, there's a couple of options in there. So there's an A, B, C and D element to it. And broadly speaking, you have to state which one of those requirements that you meet. So again, I've listed within the legislation which annexes these special requirements are contained within. It is quite a large annex, but within there it will tell you which commodity a special requirement applies to, which country it applies to. So there might be something broad stroke that says for all third countries or specific countries. For goods that are of GB origin, your local inspector will sort of know the requirements, but you should also be okay with them as well. So I would suggest going to have a look at that. And then I've just highlighted, generally speaking, what the 4 options tend to be. Bear in mind as well, there may be other requirements that don't quite fit that 4. So there may be things around sort of lab testing or growing season inspections. And also just to highlight, there may be more than one special requirement for a commodity. So for example, for malus, there's almost sort of 3 to 4 different special requirements. So when goods are of GB origin, the GB inspector will be able to attest on a phytosanitary certificate what appropriate option can be used, and they will obviously work with you as the exporter to make you aware of which one will be used. Again, broadly speaking, because our plant health regimes are closely aligned with what the current EU's plant health regime is, we have roughly the same sort of freedom from quarantine pests and diseases. So normally, most of the time, we will be able to select country freedom for those particular pests. But I'm aware, obviously, there's an element of exports where we export goods that may not be of GB origin. And what we've sort of suggested here, and I've provided in the 2 links below, is that where the special requirements are materially the same to enter GB as they are to enter the EU, we will infer from the GB phytosanitary certificate for import that it has met the EU requirements. So the example below is in relation to malus again, and you can see that actually the wording used in the 2 special requirements are pretty much the same, except that they just reference 2 different pieces of legislation. So materially, they have exactly the same meaning, and we will take that and use that on our certificates. However, there is a couple of other things that I just want to make you aware of, that if your goods, if you have exporting goods that are not of GB origin, but don't require a PC when you're importing them into GB, but have special requirements, and you then plan to export them, there will be an extra step that you will need to do. So I've highlighted 2 commodities there that this is particularly pertinent to. And like you say, it's because we have deregulated those goods. So from the 1st of January, you will not require a PC to import these goods. But if you want to export them again, then you will have to ask the EU competent authority, or wherever you're getting the goods from, whether it's another third country, to provide you with a phytosanitary certificate with the state special requirements on them stating it meets the EU requirements. So although there's no legislative need for a PC to enter GB, we will need that import PC to be able to take the special requirements from that to put it on the export PC, because that is not something that is within the gift of the GB competent authority to infer that another country is free from pest X, Y, or Z, which is why we need that phyto. So just to highlight, for those 2 goods, if you are planning on re-exporting those once you've imported them in, you will need an import PC with those special requirements on. And that particular type of movement is all underpinned sort of by international standards, so is used sort of throughout the world at the moment. So another one I just wanted to touch upon was just exports and pre-notification. So obviously, since plant health has devolved within the UK, APHA is the competent authority for England and Wales, and Scottish Government is obviously the competent authority for Scotland. So when you are bringing or exporting goods from England and Wales, you will need to make an application through eDomero, and in Scotland, you'll do it via the Scottish Government. And if you go to their website, there is an email address and a link that can take you to arranging sort of your export requirements there. The thing that obviously we'll need from trade is that we'll need as much advance notification as possible that you intend to export. So we've suggested here that you lodge an application 7 working days in advance of the export. So just to highlight that, I know that businesses will not know exactly, especially for those just-in-time trades, what you are exporting 7 days in advance. But this is effectively booking a diary slot in for you and your local inspector, so that they know that they're required to come and do an inspection. So you put an application on saying, I will need you here in a week's time. And then when you've got the consignment information about exactly what you're sending, you can amend and correct the application that you've got. Obviously, the sooner that you can give that information, the better, as that will allow the PHSI, so the Plant Health and Seed Inspectors, or the Centre for International Trade, to check your documentation to make sure that we can meet all the special requirements. So the sooner that you can give us the exact composition of an export, the better. To ensure that we can keep exports flowing, for exports for APHA, it will operate between 7 o'clock in the morning to 7 o'clock at night, 7 days a week. And most of the PCs, when an inspector comes to site, will be issued on site by inspectors. So they will have mobile printers and then produce the certificates on site. So that will mean that you will have the original copy in your hand. So there are a small amount of goods that may be issued by by the central team, and for those we will be making use of the COVID-19 easement that is currently in place for trade with the EU. So this allows you to provide a scanned image of the phytosanitary certificate to the importing agent and the MPPO, and they will use that to do their checks when it's imported into their country. Of course, the original certificate needs to follow as soon as feasibly possible afterwards. The last bullet point there just covers fees. So this is already on our sort of gov.uk webpage, and I've provided the link there. So please do go have a look at fees associated with exports. But in short, there's predominantly 2 fees, one for the production of the phytosanitary certificate and another for the time spent certifying those goods and the inspection that's associated with those. Wood packaging material. So if you are exporting any goods, and we touched upon this earlier on, that if you are moving goods to either the EU or NI, they will need to be ISPM 15 compliant, and that means it needs to have been marked and treated appropriately, normally by heat treatment. This is an international standard and applies to all trade with all third countries. Obviously, as it stands at the minute today, the internal market, you don't need to have ISPM compliant material for internal movement within the EU. But obviously from the 1st of January will be a third country, so this requirement will come into place. We've been working very closely with sort of the wood packaging material sector to understand sort of what requirements trade need, and obviously that's included increasing the capacity to be able to produce the compliant wood packaging material. What I would suggest is looking at the bullet point at the bottom there is going to TIMCON if you need more advice about getting WPM compliant material, and they should be able to put you in contact with the appropriate people, or like you say, contact your supplier. In terms of exports to the EU, we are assuming that they will continue to do their risk-based regime. So that means that your goods may be subject to checks upon arrival to the EU, not just for the plant health purposes, but also the wood packaging material. So just coming towards the end of the presentation, there's just a couple of things I just wanted to highlight again to really hammer home this message, that you need to familiarise yourself with what the EU's import requirements are. And like I say, the link has been provided for you to go and have a look at those. Have a look at the goods that you are sending, and if there are any lab tests or growing season inspections that need to occur, then please contact your local plant health and seed inspector. Two things to highlight there is that generally speaking, actually lab testing seeds aside isn't generally required for most goods, as we're able to fulfill it through other means such as country freedom, etc. So hopefully, like you say, lab testing will be relatively low. For those goods that require growing season inspections, you may have already met the requirements if you're a plant passporter, because this is what broadly growing season inspections apply to, is plants for planting, and you may have met that being a plant passporter as part of your visits there. Register with the relevant competent authority, so we've covered who they are, but there is just an extra one there in the third bullet point talking about if you are moving wood or wood products, then you will need to register with the Forestry Commission to be able to do that. And then obviously, aside from the phytosanitary aspects, there may be other things that you need to look at to be able to move your goods. So obviously, marketing requirements by the Horticultural Marketing Inspectorate for fruits and veg, as well as marketing requirements for propagation material. So that would be to contact the plants, varieties and seeds team. Obviously, CITES, so if you're moving endangered species, you will need a CITES certificate to do that. And then sort of finally organics as well. But bear in mind there may be others not included on this list. So where can you find a bit more information? So as Will has said, these slides will be made available, and I've included a couple of links there as to where there is some useful information. So there's the gov.uk web page, which contains quite a bit of information relating to both imports, exports, and sort of plant passporting, etc. from the 1st of January. The Plant Health portal, where we host quite a few documents, and there's a few useful Q&As, not only around sort of the plant health aspect, but also the plant variety and seeds requirements. You have the TIMCON website for WPM, the border operating model, which gives you a very good sort of high level view as to what will be happening for both imports and exports come the 1st of January, and contains not just the plant health aspects, but most government departments, like around customs entries and things like that. So please do, if you haven't already, have a look at that. And then just the last one, just to do with the end-to-end feasibility testing for exports. So if you haven't already registered for this, and we'll pop a link in the chat as well, please do register for this event. It is tomorrow, and what we do in this particular one is we run through a end-to-end process of how exports will work from the 1st of January, going into a little bit more detail than covered sort of in this presentation around some of the aspects, and are giving you the opportunity as well to sort of be able to feedback and say, actually, as it works, it may not work for my business, and providing us with that useful feedback to ensure that we can, in the future, make something that works for everyone. So it is your opportunity as traders to be able to feed that back in. So if you haven't registered for that event, please do have a look at that link at the bottom. So I'll pause there. So I realise that was a lot of information in a very short period of time. So I'll pause, and if there are any questions, please do ask.
Lovely, thank you so much for that, Jason. The first question, now this one's a bit random because I think it's to do with imports rather than exports, but you might be able to correct me. My main question is a peach registration. If the importing company has to do this, what happens if our customer doesn't do this? Can we clarify if that is just about imports and we can take it away?
So that one, so that one is definitely about imports. So peach is the registration system used for imports. So just bear in mind that for exports, you will need to use eDomero. So if you haven't registered through that service for the government gateway, you will have to register for eDomero as well as peach if you are importing and exporting. If you haven't registered, obviously we'll come back to you, sort of with a more formal response from the imports team. But if you haven't registered, then you won't be able to make the import notifications to say that your goods have arrived. And obviously there's an obligation for you to do that.
Lovely, thank you, Jason. Could you guide on how to cover EU rejections? How do we get the goods back into the UK?
Sure. So there's two elements to this, and it would very much depend if the goods were rejected at the border control post and effectively didn't clear customs. So if that's the case, then it effectively becomes something that's deemed a returned good. And there's custom processes around that. What you would have to do from a plant health perspective, if those goods were rejected at the border, you would have to make a peach notification when those goods return. There will not be any fees associated with it, but obviously if goods are failing in the EU, then it would be a concern if it's particularly for a pest and disease, because obviously we're closely aligned with sort of the EU's requirements. So we may have to do checks upon goods returning. If goods have cleared customs and they've moved inland, for instance, and then the customer in the EU decides that for some reason, A, it might not have met the quality, or B, it's not what was ordered, etc., then it will be up to the exporter, along with yourself, yourselves as the exporter and the importer, to arrange for those goods to be returned. The likelihood being that they would have to issue something called a re-forwarding phytosanitary certificate to bring those goods back to GB, because they will have cleared customs and potentially, like you say, they've changed their status. So that's, broadly speaking, what would need to occur.
Lovely, thank you, Jason. Our next question is, and just to mention that there are a lot of questions about seeds in the chat, we can take a lot of these away and give them to our seeds team. So we might not be able to cover all of them, but we'll try and cover a few. So this one is there any update on the situation with veg seeds, where the current rules seem to suggest veg seed packed in the UK will not be accepted in the EU, and that packets have to have a European address on them?
Yeah, so on this one, unfortunately, it sits within sort of the plants, varieties and seeds team, and I know there's been quite a few queries on this one recently. I think in the first instance, I think there is some guidance on the Q&A regarding sort of the veg seed and what would happen from the 1st of January, but I will have to take that one away to get an answer from the plants, varieties and seeds team specifically for you on that one. So.
No worries, thank you, Jason. Will an exporter be able to export seed potatoes to Switzerland? If so, what will the protocol be?
So seed potatoes to Switzerland is an interesting one in that, like you say, broadly speaking, we treat them as an EU member state. So I believe that the goods may be prohibited from the first. However, I will go away and double check that and just double check the actual agreements as well to make sure that they fall within the same group as the EU.
Lovely, thank you, Jason. Does the phytosanitary certificate cover the requirements / guarantees for growing media attached to the plant?
Yes, so for growing media attached to plants is a very good one to highlight, in that there are special requirements associated with that. So the phytosanitary certificate will need to attest two particular points in regards to growing medium attached to plants. So there's two elements, one in relation to at the time of planting and one in relation to since time of planting. There are a couple of options associated with each of them, and sort of revolve around being either free from the growing media at the time of planting. You can plant it in sort of peat or coir. It can be subject to effective sort of heat treatment or some other form of treatment, such as like autoclaving. And then there's a systems-based approach where you provide more than it has to be more than sort of one step in terms of how you've mitigated particular sort of plant health risks associated with the growing medium. So it may include things like treated sort of compost, or sort of what the constituent parts of, like say if there's wood fibre and that's been heat treated and put through an extruding process, then it may be okay. Obviously, the other option is you have to pick between two options since planting, and revolves around being that the growing media is physically separated from the soil. So, like you say, if it's on benches or in pots and plates, etc. But there is the alternative option where you can, prior to export, you can do root washing to remove the growing media and then place it in some compliant growing media.
Lovely, thank you. Will third country phytosanitary certificates be valid for export to the EU, or do we need a new UK issued phytosanitary certificate?
You will need a new UK issued or GB issued phytosanitary certificate. So if you import goods from, say, let's say South Africa, and then they come into the UK, or it's sort of within the sort of the internal market, and then you plan to then export those, then yes, they will need to be certified by the GB competent authority before being exported.
Lovely, thank you. Gary, this one's for you. What is ISBN 15? I think it was covered in the presentation, but if you just want to do a quick summary.
Yeah, so it's just an international standard regarding wood packaging material. So basically, it's an industry standard to make sure that all wooden pallets meet a certain sort of phytosanitary level, and basically says they either need to be treated in some way, usually heat treated, before they're used, and then they're branded basically to show that heat treatment has happened, and that then allows them to be exported. So it's just about heat treating them or treating them in some other way to make sure that they're free from pests. And this ISPM 15 sets out the ways that can happen and make sure that it's done in a standard way.
Brilliant, thank you. And you covered the next question in there. Are pallets included in wood packaging material?
They are indeed, yep.
Lovely, thank you, Gary. Jason, I think this one's back to you. To enable export of EU grown product back to the EU, will the product need an inbound phyto from the supplier to enable an export phyto certificate to be produced?
Yeah, so this is an interesting one. So yes, when you bring those goods in from the 1st of January, if they fall sort of, and their plants for planting, they fall within the high priority plants, then you will be required to have a phytosanitary certificate for import. Then if you are obviously sort of propagating that material or growing it on, so the phytosanitary status of those goods then change, and then you plan to send them back to the EU, then yes, you will need to have those goods certified to make sure that they can still meet the EU's import requirements.
Thank you. And you covered this as well in your presentation, I believe, but has there been any update on the UK getting third country status with the EU?
So unfortunately not at the moment. Obviously it's something that sort of Defra and sort of wider as government are pushing extremely hard on, because like you say, we've been quite clear about sort of what we've done with regarding our sort of prohibitions, etc., i.e. we've added the EU as an accepted countries to that list. So it's something that we're very keen and pushing a lot at the moment. There are discussions that are ongoing at the moment sort of around that, but unfortunately I'm not in a position to be able to give a clear update on that one at the moment.
Lovely, thank you, Jason. This one you did just mention in a previous question, but now it's in relation to Northern Ireland. If we are importing from the EU to GB and then sending part of that consignment to Northern Ireland, do we need a GB issued phytosanitary certificate? As phytosanitary certificates are not required until April from EU to GB goods. That'll be regulated goods, I imagine. Can a UK one be issued without information from a PC January to April from the country of origin?
So that sort of comes back to one of the particular points on the slide. So if there aren't any special requirements associated with it in terms of sort of pertaining to the country of origin, then the GB competent authority will be able to issue a certificate based on, like you say, those inspections that occur. It's only where there is a special requirement pertaining to the country of origin, so for the citrus and the malice, that would be a particular issue.
Lovely, thank you. Gary, this is a question for you. I know that I've asked it to you and it came up in a previous session. Do I understand correctly that wooden shelves on Danish CC trolleys do not require ISPM 15? Did you have
So I have asked the Forestry Commission about this as well. I mean, the understanding seems to be that yes, wood components permanently attached to something, so freight vehicles or containers, are generally regarded as being sort of sufficiently low risk that they're exempt from the ISPM 15 requirements, because they're just, as I say, they're just sort of low risk enough. And so when I asked Forestry Commission, their understanding was that the exemption extends to the shelves of well.
Lovely, thank you, Gary. Jason or Ed, can we export non-certified products, wheat/OSR, for R&D under a phyto?
So my initial one on that is if it's for research purposes, then it will have to be exported under a scientific license is my assumption on that one. But Ed, I'm not sure if there's anything else you want to add to that.
Yeah, that could very well be the case where it's for research and development. Yeah, we might have to look at that one, Jason. I think it's quite specific. There's been one or two other similar questions with R&D type background to it.
Thank you both.
I think if you're able to, sorry Olivia, if we send a if you're able to send whoever asked that question to the plant health sort of EU exit queries email address, just specifying exactly what it is you're planning on exporting and moving, then we can have a look at specifically at those particular goods just to see what requirements may apply.
Lovely. Just to note that email address is in the privacy notice that Will posted in the chat earlier. He can post it again if that's any help. Jason, I think this one might be for you. Will groupage loads created in the UK from EU and other third country products be allowed to use the original phyto certificates, or will the consignment require a UK PC from a new inspection?
Can you read that one again? Sorry.
Yeah, okay. I think you might have covered it actually, now I'm reading it again. So will groupage loads created in the UK from EU and other third country products be allowed to use the original phytos, or will the co-assignment require a UK PC from a new inspection? So we've got a load created in the UK, which is a mix of third country and EU goods.
Yeah, so if you're mixing the consignments, etc., then yeah, you won't be able to use the original import PC. So bear in mind as well, the original import PC will have the consignee's address for GB, which would also not be pertinent to any sort of export that would then be occurring sort of to the EU or NI. So yes, you would need to have a new certificate issued, and obviously an inspection, etc.
Lovely, thank you. If we send goods to Spain from the UK, which travel through other EU countries, so do we have to use a transit movement?
That's a very good question, and I'm afraid it is one that I am not competent to answer, in that it's obviously a customs requirement. If from a phytosanitary perspective, that I would imagine, like you say, there would be no need to follow sort of the transit rules around that, because it would be obviously from the point of exit. Obviously, when it would enter GB, there would be the normal notification procedures associated with it, but we will have to take that one away to speak to our colleagues in sort of HMRC just to double confirm that one for you.
Lovely, thank you. So back to your special requirements table that you had on one of your slides. It says this table includes plant products. Can seeds of Malus and Prius be exported to nurseries to be grown?
So I will quickly just double check the legislation. I think the legislation in relation to the Annex 6 prohibitions applies to plants for planting, but within that brings into scope seeds. So I think Malus is in Annex 6. So potentially, like you say, from a phytosanitary perspective, yeah, unless we get added to the exceptions list on there, then yeah, in theory, we won't be able to send seeds.
Lovely, thank you, Jason. Ed, I believe this one might be for you. Could you elaborate or confirm that just-in-time shipments will be given priority by APHA inspectors?
Just-in-time shipments. Yeah, we'll always aim to facilitate the trade as much as we can, but we also need as much notice as well from trade. So that includes, you know, working very closely with your local inspector around the sort of commodities that are going. I assume, you know, this may be produce, you know, goods or food for consumption with a short lifespan. So yeah, we'd always aim to do that. In terms of prioritizing it over somebody else's, well, every single consignment, export or import, is always the most important to that person at that point in time. So I couldn't promise that we would prioritize A over B, but certainly in terms of the number of staff that APHA has taken on ready for the end of transition period, we've recruited somewhere around 170 new inspectors to help facilitate that, and that is for England and Wales. So certainly, you know, we're putting a lot of effort and resource into preparing and onboarding new inspectors to help support those exports.